Hey everybody, welcome back to another Thursday Nowaski video. So once again, we are going to interrupt our Thursday bike build series. So again, we're reeling from Sturgis and we're getting back in the groove of things here at the shop, and we have some really cool new projects coming up. But we wanted to get a few things in front of you guys here while we had some time. So last Thursday, we installed a swing arm on an FXR, and you learned something there. So now this Thursday, we are going to be installing a Koso gauge on this 2007 Road Glide. So as you guys know, we've been working on developing this kit. So what this kit is going to allow you to do is use this Koso RX3S universal gauge in the old style Road Glide fairing. So this gauge will have everything, your speedometer, tachometer, all your indicator lights, everything for your gauges. And then this is going to replace the factory radio. So yes, we're eliminating the radio on here. We're eliminating the 4 gauges, actually all 6 gauges to this universal gauge in the middle. So we've been working on figuring that out. That's geared towards you performance guys that are trying to slim down, shave weight, eliminate things off your motorcycle. If you do want to have tunes, like Slick has a Bluetooth Genghis and some speakers on his bike, but that's a different video. This is for this. So Jake is going to do an in-depth video on installing our kit and our new plug-and-play wiring harness from NAMS. Yeah, that's right, plug and play. We're trying to make this easy for you guys. So we're touching on these old baggers first, and we're going to work out from there. So I am going to turn this over to Jake, and you're going to learn something again today.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Jake here at Nowaski Extreme Performance, and I am going to install our new gauge relocation kit and gauge delete kit for 04 to 07 Road Glides. I have worked hard to get the design aspect of the gauge mounts themselves. I've 3D printed them, got them all lined up. Took me some time to get them all finessed, and then the gauge in, and then have been working on getting a wiring harness made. So that way everything is plug and play for 04 to 07, and you guys will be able to install them at home, get it looking good, and you won't need to take it to a shop. So here we go. I'm going to start by taking off the windshield. So the windshields on the older Road Glides are held in by well nuts. So there is no actual like brass ferrules in any plastic. It's all just rubber well nuts holding it on. So you kind of loosen it, and every one except for the center one. Center one you have to take all the way out. So you have that to get the windshields off. Now I'm going to start working on getting the outer fairing off. You need to start by taking the acorn nuts that are back here. So some models were a little different. Some have different setups. But they all are mounted, unless they have an internal mount. They are mounted through the fairing with that to the crash bar. That holds the fairing from rattling around. And I can start to remove the 6 screws that hold the outer fairing on. Is that like one of them bloopers when the microphone's hanging from the ceiling and you know the guy will dink?
Oh yeah.
Got my best man Nick over here trying to take me out. Little does he know that I have a hard head and it's going to damage his camera before it damages the head. So one thing I would like to express at this time is anytime you're going to pull off a fairing, or if you're working on your bars or whatnot, in this case it's the fairing right now, I'm going to take a rag or a cover of some sort to cover the fairing so that way nothing falls on the fairing, damages your paint. So fairings for road glides this year can be sometimes a pain in the butt because if you look, there's 2 hooks right here. And these 2 hooks hook into these 2 slots on the fairing. And sometimes it's hard to get them to line up and get them to hook right. So putting fairing on can sometimes be a chore for the road glides. So at this point, I am going to unplug all my connections. Start with the radio. My gauge connections. Light bulb, which we will not need. Going back in, and then I'm going to grab a 3/16 Allen. And remove these 2 bolts. There's 2 on each side. So once I've removed these 4 bolts, I can plug the antenna and I can pull the radio out. Now, sometimes they're a little harder to pull out. There is a rubber surround on them, but they will come out. Depending on the radio, sometimes they do have to go that way if it's an aftermarket radio. I'm gonna grab a 5/16 socket. We're going to take these off. Gauge comes from the front. The mount holds it from the back side. Then you're going to repeat that 3 times. What I like to do around here is before I install anything, I'm going to make sure that this is all cleaned up. When you have a chance to clean everything up because you're in spaces that aren't normally seen, that's your best chance. So I'm going to talk about these mounts a little bit here. So it's going to come with a button head, Allen, and then the 2 pieces. You have your front side and your receiver cup on the back. Now if you notice, there's a tab. And if you notice in the fairing, there's 2 slots. It doesn't matter which slot it goes in, but typically I put them in the top. This makes it so this doesn't rotate. Then the receiver cup is going to go on the back. And it locks in so the back also does not rotate. So we'll get this piece back in here. So I'm going to make sure that my receiving cup lines up with the front piece and make sure my screw is threaded in. Then I'm going to tighten it. Now, on this, I'm not going to give you a torque spec because you just want to snug it. You don't want to, you have to remember that these are plastic. They're carbon fiber plastic, but they're still plastic. So they will, if you tighten it too hard, it will pull the threaded insert out. There you go. First one is installed. Now I'm going to do that 3 more times. As you can see, I have all 4 in there ready to go. One thing I will say is while we have them in black and this is how you're going to get them, these are the same ones that were used on Slick Stunt Bagger. So you notice he used a wrap to do that. So really the sky's the limit as far as what you want to do. You could have them painted to match the fairing. You can do anything that you want to do to customize your motorcycle. Now I am going to work on the exciting part. You didn't think it could get any more exciting, but it can. So I've put a lot of thought into these pieces right here. I'm going to talk about them a little bit. So they are not universal. It might look like it can go on either which way. It cannot. There is a way that it can go on, the only way it can go on. I will also state that, as you'll see in this video, you do need to do a little bit of trimming in here for the gauge to sit recessed and properly. But if you'll notice, there is a piece here that is got a smaller recess and a bigger recess. There is a way that'll go in, and we will explain that when I put the gauge in. Also, when I design this, you do not trim these sides because this fits snug against there to get it so that way it doesn't move back and forth much once everything's tightened. This, you'll see, has a taper and the holes the way they are. That is also to do with sitting against the inside of here the way it sits. So I'm going to get the gauge and kind of lay everything out, and then we'll get to trimming. So as I was saying, the back of this mount and the back of that will match up. This mount goes like that, or the gauge goes like that. So this, obviously, is going to sit like that. So that's going to be your top, and that's going to be that. So this gauge, as it sits in there, obviously it can't go all the way through. And this piece here will sit there. So when I trim all of this, this will end up sitting in there, and this will actually be just above flush. So to talk about this piece a little bit more in depth, so you'll see that there is more material on the top than there is on the bottom. The recess is different, and that goes for how it to sit here. So as you can see right now, I have the bigger lip up, fits in there, sits there the way it should. If I were to reverse that, it does not fit properly. So that's your easiest way to verify which side is up and which side is down. So that being said, now if you look through here, you can see that I'm going to need to take some of this material out for this gauge to sit in here properly. And I am going to work on that right now. So that being said, I just want to take out this little bit here, not up into here. So I'm going to put this on here, and I'm going to grab my fancy dancy little Sharpie. Now obviously there's variances in manufacturing and stuff like that. So this has just a little bit of play back and forth. So I'm going to take once I'm centered, I'm going to take my marker and I'm just going to draw a little spot right there and there. That lets me know what I got to take out. Got my cutoff wheel. There's multiple different ways you can do this. If you don't have a cutoff wheel, you could use a Dremel. You could use a small hand saw, like a file if you want. This is what I'm choosing to use. Put my safety glasses on, because you know safety sixth. Now, before I decided to cut, figured I would make sure I protect this part while this fairing isn't painted. I know some of you guys have painted fairings, and I would hate for your fairing to get messed up by following my instructions. So as I'm cutting, I'm making sure that this is also going to move, and I don't want that to drag along there. So I'm going to get as close as I can to that line. And then at that point, I'm going to grab my smaller Dremel. And then once that's pulled out, I'm going to clean up kind of any of the little overhangs I have. Little material that didn't cut because it is plastic, so it some of it just melts. But I'm going to get that all nicely cleaned up. Move my thing. And that should be all I need. So now, I'm going to clean all this up again, wipe this down. If you had any edges or anything that really needed to be that, you can get in here with a small sander, sand it all down. Mine all feels pretty good. I want to talk about these parts here a little bit. You have the backing plate for the gauge. It's not universal, it does go a certain way. So as you can see, there's writing on the gauge there, and so that is the correct way to put it. So the holes for that are gonna line up like so. This, you have to remember that as we put this in, because we're gonna put this in before we put the gauge on. This is gonna come from the back side here, and I'm going to kind of hold it in there like that and get my bolt started. Come on. So there is 4 bolts that go in from the back side. Two on each side. So I'm going to get them in and going before, I want to get all 4 threaded in there before I start tightening anything. So now, as you can see, if you come over here a little bit, you see right there, that taper sits there just right to keep that where it needs to be. So now I'm going to take and tighten this. Just like with the gauge, the small gauge deletes, I want to make sure I'm not over torquing these. Once again, it is a brass insert, heat insert into plastic, so they could strip out if you really torque on them. Now, I'm going to take my fancy dancy gauge, and I have all my stuff there, and I'm going to put it in there. Now, in the gauge package itself comes the 3 nuts that'll go on the back of the studs for this. Like everything else, I'm going to religiously put a little Loctite on there. Those 3 will be an 8mm. So now at this point, we have installed all the physical hardware that goes with this kit. You have your gauge mount, your gauge, everything is secure. You have your pods in. We will be eliminating this as we go because you won't need this anymore. And then in the gauge itself comes the harness that Koso will send along. This, on the other hand, is what I'm kind of excited about, is the Nowaski Extreme Performance gauge relocation harness that I have been working closely with NAM's wiring on. Now we're going to get into the rest of the delete part, which we're going to get rid of the gauges and whatnot, and then we're going to work on getting the harness for the gauge installed. It is a Nowaski product, so I have to run it down the backbone a little bit. There'll be a couple wires for this model that we have to use a jumper to get tach and speedo signal from off of the cruise control module. I will need to remove the seat and the tank. But we're going to start with the gauge cluster. So these 2 screws to remove. And this here, you just kind of go from the top and it pops up. And then behind there, you have your speedo plug that you're going to unwire, your tach plug that you're going to unwire, and then this is your warning lights, which you'll no longer be using. So all this here, you just throw in the, I'm just kidding, don't throw it away, save it just in case you need it. So then you have all of that stuff in there now. Now there's 2 bolts in each side to take this off. You'll also need to take off the ignition switch here in order to do that. You will need the key, which is handily up here, in order to take off the ignition switch. So you take the key and you put it in there. Now, underneath these ignitions, which I'll show you after take it off, is a little button. So sometimes you can get your finger in there, sometimes you can't. So you push that button up, and then that key turns that way, and this pops up. So if you look, there's this little button right here. Push that down, turn that key, it stays locked. What that does is there's move this spring. If you look, there's a little tab. And that's what locks it onto the ignition. Then you take a 7/8 wrench, and very lightly you turn this. Now, the ignition itself here is plastic. So you gotta be careful loosening it and tightening this back down that you don't snap that off. Okay, so there's 4 bolts that are in here to hold the rest of this nacelle on. So we're going to take these off. So now, for this project, we're going to have a naked front end in here. I know there's some people that aren't going to get rid of this. Like they might put dummies in here or whatnot for the gauges just to delete that. But typically we are seeing everybody using naked trees or aftermarket trees or whatnot. So that's kind of the performance-based thing. That is why we went with this. So that way you can run your T-bars and all that on here and this is all gone. So then we're going to pull these apart. Now, kind of want to be careful pulling them apart. They are just plastic. And if you look, there's just little plastic tabs that make this slide together. And if you snap them, they never line up quite the same again. So I'm going to slowly kind of rotate this out. I can't just pull it straight off because there are still switches in here. And if I remember correctly, there is a plug right here that goes to these switches. And that's going to allow me to remove this. In turn, it'll also allow me to remove this. Now, if you look off the speedo, there's a wire that goes right here. Depending on the year of the road glide, sometimes it went up here. There's a rubber screw cap that comes off. Then this little button comes out. Try not to damage this. This is your trip and odometer button to change all your stuff. Rotating this one up like I did the other side. This one's a little more tricky because I have a clutch cable in there. That's not as forgiving. So you want to make sure you finagle that out without breaking it, separating it. If you do separate it, just verify where the parts go. You can put them back together. If you lose the parts, then you're going to have to buy a new one. If you can't seem to get it right, this will come out if you get a little flat head in there and all that, but it's kind of tricky. So I'd recommend trying to do it without breaking that. And there we go. So this leaves me now where I have, well, some random wires. Now, with this harness, this will plug in back here in the back of the gauge. Make sure you're all the way plugged in. Which way does that go? So make sure you're all the way plugged in. On this part of the harness, we're going to take this here and if you come to the front again, I know you guys are probably getting dizzy here. If you come here, there's a spot that comes into the fairing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this part of my harness and, like, you can't see, but on the other side I'm just kind of walking them in, not just yanking. It will all fit. You just gotta, there. So this is all of the harness you need. So now what you're gonna do is you're gonna take the one that was on your Speedo, which is the one that has the button. This one will not be used anymore.
Show them the button again.
Look. So it's the black one, FYI. And we're going to go into this plug. It is directional. It will only go in one way. And then you have it's right here. No, it's right here. So this was the one that went to your handlebar switches and that. This one is the one that went to your warning lights. So now that you have that all plugged in, you do have in this plug for your thing was your on-off for your cruise control. If you're going to continue to use your cruise control, you're either going to need to, but you're not going to have any buttons up here, you're either going to need to hook in a button somehow, some way from your thing and relocate the switch. Or if I get enough people asking in the comments, maybe I can make a jumper that'll keep that going and you won't have a switch at all. Your cruise control will just always be on. So if that's something you'd like to see, leave messages in the comments and I can work on that next. At this point, I'm going to take off the seat. I'm going to take off the gas tank so that way I can find the rest of the wires I need. So the seat, depending on if you have a tour pack, don't have a tour pack, all seats, all Harleys, there is some kind of mechanical fastener back here. This one here happens to be a Phillips head. And then you're going to, if you can, get under here so you don't lose your screw. And this will in turn remove the seat like that. So, in order to remove the gas tank, it's easiest to remove the fuel because the 07 and down have this crossover tube. And if you just get rid of it, if you just take that off, all your fuel runs all over the place and it gets to be a mess. So, all right, so you can either siphon the fuel out or, being that I do this all the time, I have made it so that way I can operate the fuel pump with a hose on there to drain it. So, I'm going to take all this off. So I can get to my plug-in. However, if you were to siphon off the tank, you wouldn't have to hook that up. You just unhook that to remove the tank. And you would open this up, put your hose in your filler there. and siphon it out. Me, on the other hand, I create stuff. And if you look, I think I'm kind of clever. So while I'm letting that do that, I can start by removing the bolts for the gas tank. I'm gonna have one here. One here. And one on the other side. For these two wires, which when you get them, they will be also wrapped in this. This is the first harness we have, so you guys are seeing me do it here first. But you're gonna feed these through there, just like you fed those back through there. And then I'm going to bring them along here, like so. Then I'm gonna let them hang here for a little bit, because what needs to happen is once this tank comes off, I need to pull this plastic shroud off. And underneath there, it's going to be my tack wire and my speed sensor wire. And you'll have two Scotch lock crimp connections to do to get these wired in. And then we're gonna turn it on and verify everything's good. Okay, so I've drained the tank, and now I'm at the point where I'm gonna remove this cross hose. Now that being said, there's an Oetiker clamp on here. I'm gonna get that off. And no matter how much fuel I've drained out of this tank, there's always gonna be a little bit of fuel that spills. So what a lot of times I'll do is I'll take this tank and I'll kind of pitch it up a little bit, so that way the fuel kind of rolls back. But like I said, no matter what I do, this fuel is going to come out, so you're probably not going to want to stand there. This one wasn't too bad, but as you can see, there was still some residual fuel. But luckily enough, I saved my good buddy Nick from getting burned up or gas on him. So there's a shroud that covers all of your wiring. I'm going to remove this. It does just snap into place. You just have to kind of work it a little bit here and there. If it's not coming, kind of start in another spot and work it a little bit. Don't force it. It is just plastic. It will break.
This is Jake's worst nightmare.
I was actually going to say that while we are messing with a little bit of the wiring and all that, this is a relatively easy job overall. So I don't want it I don't want you guys to get freaked out and think you can't do this, because you can. If you're semi-mechanically inclined, you can do this. On a Wisconsin rating, I'd give this a 3-spotted cow. So you're gonna have these wires here. Now, if you notice, this one is white and green. This one is pink. But it's crazy, because if you look in this harness, this one is white and green. This one is pink. Now there is a pink one here too, but if you turn that a little bit, it's pink and yellow. You don't want the pink and yellow one. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cut all of these. Just kidding, don't cut anything except for this zip tie. As you're cutting that zip tie, verify that you don't have any wires in there. Take that, send that home to mom. So, now that I have a little more room in here, white and green, pink. You're not gonna believe it, but this white and green is gonna go to this white and green. This pink is gonna go to this pink. So for sake of progress, I'm gonna use posi taps. However, in the kits that you guys will be receiving, they will have Scotch locks that crimp onto the lines. I just happened to be out at the time. So you'll take that. You will not have to do this, like I said, this is, or for those of you that are like me and like to do wiring and stuff like that, you can also cut and solder these. But I am making this for the everyday person. Now I'm trying to get these to a spot because I have to put that shroud back on or cover all the wiring. So I want to make sure these aren't going to cause me any problems there. White and green to white and green, pink to pink. So then I'm going to put this on, and kind of like how I took it off, I'm going to just kind of walk it all back up. I'm going to make sure my wires for the speedo and the tack are where they need to be. I want to make sure I'm not pinching any wires that shouldn't be pinched or where they shouldn't be, because that can cause you some issues. Now, like I said, these would be covered. These will be in their own little loom. What I would do is make sure you run that through there, which I will be taking this back off to verify fitment on everything else. So run it through there, and then if need be, you can run a zip tie on this main harness. Now we're going to go the opposite direction we were. Tank's gonna go back on. Just like taking it off. Gonna kind of make sure it's up a little bit so I can feed this hose under here. Try not to leak a ton of gas everywhere. I'm just gonna put that there for a minute. I do need to get a new clamp to put on there. If you have a tool for an Oetiker clamp, I would use an Oetiker clamp. If not, you can use a hose clamp. I'm not sure if we'll be sending that. I'm assuming we'll send that in the kit, but tighten that down. That is done. True to everything else, blue Loctite. So now I'm going to make sure that my tank is lined up. My bolts go in. I'm going to make sure all of my bolts are in and threaded before I tighten any of them, so that way I don't have any alignment issues later. So for this project, for right now, I'm going to put the ignition back on. For those of you that are doing ignition deletes and whatnot, you would not be doing this step. Like I said, when taking this off, be very careful putting this on. So I'll put it on. I'm gonna grab my 7/8 wrench. And I'm very lightly just gonna snug it. Have my tab pushed in, make sure my spring is in there. You hear it click. And if I were to turn it on, as you can see, the gauge is lighting up. Going to put everything back together. Work on putting the fairing all back on and everything. So I will say that while this is plug and play to an extent, there are some settings that will need to be changed in the Koso in order to register the correct speed, the correct tack output, the correct or close fuel gauge level. It's not 100% as this is a universal gauge, so your fuel gauge will be off a little bit, but not extreme as long as you change the settings correctly. Stay tuned for a different video for me to go into changing the setup for the gauges to be universal for your bike. Another little thing I want to point out about this Koso gauge is you will no longer be using the button that comes with anymore. You will now be using its own button that is sent with Koso. This is a 2-button system and it controls all the functions on the gauge. That has its own plug-in on this harness. It is this one. So where you want to put this gauge or this button all depends on you. You'll have enough to be able to put it on your bars if you want to put it up here. I will say on Slick's bike, I actually drilled a small hole in his glove compartment and drilled a couple holes for the screws and screwed it in here, right here with a piece behind so the buttons don't come out. So there's a little piece that goes in there. Once again, if that's something that you want to see in the kit, leave a comment. It's something that I can make and include. But that would go in there. Just an FYI for your information. Right. So at this time, I am going to work on putting the fairing back on, putting everything on, putting the fuel back in, starting it, so that way you guys can see everything operational. I stated earlier in the video that you have these two hooks that your fairing has to ride on. So that means you can't have a bunch of stuff wadded up right here. So what I am going to recommend you do is you unplug your ground wire and loop that back in over here. Now, make sure that you plug your ground wire back in, otherwise you're gonna have some issues where things don't work. I'm gonna tuck this back up in here. This one here, I'm gonna kind of recommend just kind of tucking up back up in here. You don't have anything in here to worry about, so you got that. If you really want, you can take this part of your harness, kind of tuck that in there too. That way, your radio and your headlight wire, you gotta obviously keep out. Radio wire, you kind of tuck in there, all that stuff. You just want to kind of get this all out of the way, so that way when you go to put your fairing back on, you're not fighting all this stuff hanging here. These here, sometimes these are gone, sometimes they're not, it really depends. In this case, they're there, so use them. They help keep everything tucked in. I actually use them on this because the way that wire has to tuck in there. When you put these on, these wires have to tuck in there, otherwise you're going to pinch them. Just another pro tip from Jake. On this project, we're going to leave the speakers in for now. I am not sure where I'm putting this button yet, so I am going to just put it there and let it hang, but connect it. So that way I can change things and I can show you guys some of the operational stuff. Still have that rag on the fender so I can rest this on there without scratching the paint. Now let's see if I am lucky enough to get this in one shot. They said road glide fairings, the older ones, were not my favorite, as they typically fight me. I can't make this up that it went that smooth. Now, when I take this off and the camera's not around, I will fight for 45 minutes to put that back on. If you come down here, come a little closer, a little closer, a little closer. There you go. You have on this fairing these fins and this piece here. There's on the top one, there's little fins too. You want these lower fins to tuck under those fins, and then those to tuck there. Always make sure you got this rubber gasket here too. So as I was saying, you have this wire here for the turn signals. You want to make sure that you have that in this groove. There's a groove on both the inner and the outer fairing, because if you don't have that in that groove, you're going to pinch that wire and you're going to wonder why your turn signals aren't working. So you just make sure that's in there like that. Then you're going to put the nuts, the acorn nuts, on the back side of that, and you're going to be good to go. We got everything installed here. I have the gauge in, I have everything back together. I have the wires ran that need to be run down and tapped into the speedo and the tack wires. Everything is complete, back together, good to go. This is the gauge lighting up. Everything is, fuel is full, neutral light is on, oil because it's not started. You have your tack running. Obviously we're not moving, so the speedo is not going to work, but that's all calibrated to what it needs to be. And through this little contraption, I can change the colors on the dash and everything like that. Those are all settings you'll play with on your own. Get yours soon at nowaski.com. And if you like this video, give a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to our channel.